All right, guys. So our next agenda item is kind of wrapping up some JavaScript items. Chad did a great introduction yesterday. I'm just going to wrap that up with a few more items that we're going to go over that will be useful for you guys. So let me bring up my coding window, share my screen. All right, so I have my JavaScript file here. We're going to be adding some code and just looking at some stuff. All right, let's get started. All right, so some stuff we talked about, or you guys are familiar with, we have arrays, which are one of the common data structures that's used in JavaScript. So I'm going to declare an array, and I do that just by creating a variable. Let's call it my array, and use brackets, square brackets, and you can put any values you want in there. So I could have numbers, I could have strings, I could even have like objects in here if I want, but I'm not going to get that complicated at this point. For my example, I'm just going to create an array with some numbers in it. They don't have to be ordered. You know, I can have a 5, a 2. All right, so I have my array here, and we're going to do some things with this array. So one of the key points I wanted to share today were array methods. So again, you can use for loops to iterate through arrays, but sometimes there's, I guess, easier, more elegant ways to achieve what you want to achieve. So the first one is array method is called for each. So if I write that, it's just for each capitalized. And this will basically go through every item in my array and do something with it. So it's essentially a for loop, but just a more compact way to write it. So one way I could implement this is I could create a function, let's call it add numbers. That will take in an array item, and that will actually not, let's call it multiply numbers. So let's say for each of these, I'm going to console.log the number multiplied by 2. So if I want to use this for each requires a function. So if you kind of look at the tooltip here, it requires a callback function. So I'm going to use my multiply numbers function. And then that should take in an item and then output the console. So if I have this all correct, I'm going to run node intro.js. I'm rushing my typing too much. Intro.js. All right, so I ran my simple JS file here. So I have my array. I have this function that will take in any item, I pass it, and multiply by 2, and then print out the console. So in this case, the for each takes in a function as a parameter, and it's going to pass each item from my array into that function, and then do what I want. So in this case, I get the correct result. You know, I have 2, 8, 14, which are these values doubled, right? So that's kind of how for each works. There's also a function called map. So I want to highlight that. Map is sort of similar to for each, but not quite the same. Obviously, if they were the same, they would probably not have duplicate methods. So this also takes in a function. However, this is going to create a new array for you. It's not going to simply call a function and do what you want. This array is going to be for each element in the original array. So I'm going to actually have to assign this to a new value. So let's call it my maps array for clarity. So it's going to take in a function, and I'm going to modify my multiply numbers function just to save time here. For each, return item times 2. So this is doing something slightly different. It's instead of printing out to the console, I'm actually just returning a value from my function. And map is going to use that function. So let's call it multiply numbers and see what happens. So I have my mapped array, console.log, that mapped array. All right, so again, map is a built-in array function. It takes in a function as a parameter. it's going to pass in each item from my array into there and then return a value. Now this return value is going to be put into a brand new array, which I've called my mapped array. So if this is working correctly, I should get an entirely new array that, and to make sure of that, let's do one more console. That's not what I want. Console.log and my original array, just to make sure things are okay. So if I clear my terminal, I'm going to bring this up a bit so I get more space. Errors will show up. All right, so let's run this again. Let's up arrow a couple times. All right, so here's my new array. Again, these values are doubled, but this is entirely new array. And then if I look at my original array, which was my array, I have my original value. So map does not modify your original array. It actually creates a brand new array for you with the logic that your function was accomplishing. So that's kind of how map works. And this is kind of why I want to, I guess, double back on what Chad talked about yesterday, which one concept was fat arrow functions. These are kind of like the hot new way of creating functions, and they definitely make your code, I guess, a little more compact and maybe robust is the wrong word. It's more, I guess, elegant is probably what I'm trying to say. The reason being, like, I have this function here called multiply numbers, and if I'm only using it in my map function, like, I don't really need to have an entire function that like no one else is going to use, right? So this is where fat arrow functions come into play. And another name for fat arrow functions are they're synonymous with anonymous functions, which just means the functions don't have a set name or are going to stay around. They're just going to get created, get used, and kind of fall off the call stack. So fat arrow notation, if you guys remember, you pass in parameters through parentheses. So in this case, I'm going to call my parameter item. Again, this could be anything. Like I could call it whatever if I want. That's going to, I'm going to go fat arrow, which just means it's taking this parameter, and then I'm going to have a function here. And that function is going to take whatever and multiply by 2 and return that. So again, this is the same thing I was doing before in my multiply numbers function. However, I've converted it to a fat arrow function, so I don't even need this function anymore. I can get rid of it if I want to. So I believe that should do the same thing. Let's verify that. Yep, got my values doubled, and my original array has not been modified. So again, this is fat arrow syntax. There's a way to simplify this when your fat arrow functions are very, I guess, simple. And by that, I mean takes in one parameter. If you're taking in one parameter, you don't have to put the parentheses there. I actually like putting parentheses there just to make it clear. It makes it more readable for me. Maybe it adds more parentheses, could be more confusing, but for me, I like having those parentheses. But in this case, just to show this example, if you have one parameter, you don't have to surround in parentheses. And then if you have only one line of code in your function, you actually don't need to return. I think you should be able to do this, and sure, fine. And that did not work fine. I think I need to, yeah, so sorry about that. So what I did here, I simplified it by removing the parentheses in my input and also the curly brackets for my return value. I don't even need a return here. Like, fat arrow functions are smart enough to say, okay, you have one input and one line of execution. I know I need to return that. However, if I had multiple lines here, I would need those curly brackets back. I can't just have like two expressions as is. I need to have these curly brackets and say like whatever equals 2. And then let's say I want to console.log something. I could do that in here also. But in this case, I need those curly brackets back. So I need to actually modify this even more. And for clarity, you should always break out more detailed functions in new lines. So I'm going to do that here. It's way easier to read that way. So you return whatever equals 2. So now this, I'm doing multiple things here, so I need these curly brackets. But essentially, it's the same thing. I'm still creating another array from my map function. All right, so the console log is all this stuff. I have my array in my original array. All right, so that's kind of how map works. We have a few more functions that are very similar to map. So let's go over those. We have something called filter. So my filtered array equals my array and filter. So as you might guess, filter actually filters your items and returns only select items based on whatever condition or logic you have specified. So for this, I am going to use a fat arrow function again. I'm going to use my parentheses because they make me feel safe. Fat arrow that, and then have curly brackets because again, I just like having that structure there. In this case, I'm going to return. Let's make this a condition. So let's say item. Since we're dealing with numbers, I'm going to say anything less than. Let's modify this a little bit. 29, 14. Let's say anything under 15, I want to keep in my return array. Else, if it's greater than 15, I don't want those items in my new array. So if I do this, return item less than 15, and let's print that out to console as always. So let's see what we're dealing with. My filtered array. Save that. I'm going to get rid of my map function. I'm going to clutter my output. Run that again. So I do node intro.js because that's my file. All right, so let's take a look at the array that got printed out. In this case, I have values 1, 4, 7, 8, 2, 5, and 14, which makes sense. So the 32 for my array got dropped, and the 29 got dropped when I was copying it over to my new array. Again, my original array, those values are still there. That did not get modified. These functions don't modify the original array. It just produces a new array output or new value, depending on the function you're using. So that's kind of how filter works. Again, these are very useful. You're going to be using this a lot, especially like in React. When you're writing JavaScript within like React code, it's better to use these fat arrow functions and kind of use these array methods rather than using for loops in places. All right, so the next one I want to talk about is called reduce. This one's a little different. This is actually going to take all your values in your array and kind of boil it down into one compact item. And again, you can kind of control what that item is. In this case, since we're dealing with numbers, we could either multiply all of them or add them together. If these were strings, like we could combine those into string values. So I guess for that example, let's change my array. So let's have A, E, I don't know, H. What are your favorite letters in the alphabet? Z. Z is a good one. Let's go with W. All right, we have some characters in here. Don't need this function. So let's call reduce. So reduce has a slightly different syntax for what it's expecting. So this is a case where we need more than one parameter passed into our function. So again, I'm still using fat arrow syntax. Hopefully it's familiar enough to you guys. If you guys aren't comfortable with fat arrow functions, definitely bring it up in your discussion so your instructor can go over them because they're widely used and widely recommended just from a style standpoint. All right, so in this case, I need two parameters. One I'm going to call sentence. And again, these I can name whatever I want. And then my other one's going to be the item that you get from my array. And that's going to be passed in to a function, and I'm going to do something with it. So in this case, I think I want to just create a full string out of all of these methods, or all of these items. So to do that, I just need to take my aggregator. So in this case, sentence is my aggregator. That's what's collecting all my data. And then item is each individual item that I'm getting. So I'm just going to return sentence plus item. So this should be concatenating the item to my aggregator. So if I probably name this correctly, it's called my reduced results. So this is actually not going to output an array. It's going to produce one value from all my items. So it's not actually an array that you get output here. Reduced B. All right. Pending any typos, I think this should work. And yep, that works, except I have a random S character here for no good reason at all. All right, so just run that again. Yeah, so I have one string here. It's AEHZW. That's what I expected because all my letters got compacted into this parameter, which I call sentence. So that's kind of how reduce works. Again, that could be done with numbers. If you want to like add all the numbers together, reduce could be one way to do it. Again, you can do this with for loops. There's many ways to go about the same solution, but reduce is just a more compact way to achieve it. A couple other methods that I just want to highlight. There's plenty of array methods. I'm not going to go over all of them. These are just ones that you might commonly use or might want to use at some point, so they're good to know about. There's one called every, and this one as you may or may not guess, it basically verifies something about the array to see if every item achieves some criteria. So let's see what my criteria should be. Let's just make it simple. Let's say item equals item to lowercase. All right, so what I'm checking here is I want to see if all my items are equal to their lowercase counterpart, meaning are all my original items lowercase letters. To be clear, the to lowercase method does not modify my string that I pass in. It creates a new string from there. So let's say this is going to be a Boolean value, so is valid, I guess what I would call it, and then I'll print that out, is valid. All right, so if all my items are lowercase, I should get a true from this. So let's run that. Excuse me. Yep, I get a true. Great. To see this not work or not get a true, let's make a capital H here. Run that again. And that is not what I expected. Big mistake there. I had a single equals, not double or triple equals. Bad on me. All right, so let's run that again. All right, I get a false this time. So make sure my code is working correctly before. Let me change that back. And all right, we get a true. Good lesson there. Don't use single equals for comparators. Kind of embarrassing there, but happens to the best of us. All right, the last one I'm going to highlight is called sum. And this one's similar to every, except it's just validating that at least one item in your array qualifies or satisfies some condition. So let's make this to uppercase. So if I run this, I'm going to be checking to see if any item here satisfies my case. So in this case, I got false because if I look at my original array, these are all lowercase numbers. But let's say I change one of them. Let's make it Z because Z is a cool letter. Save that. If I run this, I should get a true. Fingers crossed. Yep, got a true. Because at least one of these items satisfied my case here, or my condition here, so that sum basically just returns true for me. All right, so those are some array methods. They're good to know about. You'll probably be using these. Get familiar with them. Again, when you're doing your coding challenges, like if you think you're using a for loop, but you could use one of these methods, I would say try these methods. Again, it might take a little, some time getting used to them and might require extra effort up front, but the better you are with these methods, the easier it'll be down the line when you really need to use them, like in React or other cases where fat array functions and these array functions make sense. All right, so those are some things about arrays that I want to go over. Next, we're going to talk about objects. So objects are key to JavaScript. They kind of are very useful. We've been using them a lot for our challenges. In your pre-work, you're probably using them. So I just want to touch on some topics about objects. As we know, objects are declared with curly braces. Excuse me. And you could put in key value pair. So this is an empty object. If I wanted to add some items, I could say blah equals hello world. I could have different types in here. So, let's say I want some key to equal, I don't know, let's make this numeric. Let's say 533. I don't know. And we could have more keys, another key here. Let's make this equal to a Boolean. Change it up. And let's add a couple more keys here. So if I want to highlight what I wanted to highlight, let's make a key equal to 5, and this will be 5. And let's have one called 4. All right, so this is my object. It has a bunch of different types in it. Some of the values are strings, some are numbers, some are Booleans. Totally fine. Objects are pretty flexible in that way. So let me just print this up to console to, I don't know, just for fun. Save that, run that. All right, so I have my objects output here. Let me clear my console just to make this a little more clear. All right, so I printed out my object. I created it, and I'm printing it out. But if you kind of notice something about it, or maybe you didn't notice, but I want to point it out, is the order I created my keys and values is not how it was printed out to the console. So if you notice, I actually declared 4 as my last element, but it's actually displayed first here. And then 5 was second last. It's actually second here. But I declared blah first, and it's somehow third in my display out here. This is a key thing to remember about objects. So object ordering is not inherently guaranteed. So you shouldn't expect just because, hey, I created this blah key value pair that it will be the first item in my object. Objects are not ordered. That if you want something that's ordered and guaranteed ordered, use arrays. So that's kind of why I used arrays in the Roman numerals challenge. I didn't want to rely on the fact that if I used like 1,000 and 500 and then 100, I didn't know if those would be ordered. And I don't want to rely on that. So you should never inherently rely on ordering in objects. That's what I want to drive home here. There is some sense to the way they organize this. I'm not going to say you should always rely on it, but I'd say research more into it if you're curious. But the way that I understand it, or I read about it, is when you have different types of keys, it'll actually take your numeric keys. In this case, I have a 4 and a 5. It'll order those in numeric order. So if you can see, my output is the 4 comes first and the 5. So even if I add, let's say I slid in a 2 in here and called it 2, I would expect the 2 to be at the very top. So numerically, your keys will be sorted in numeric order if there are numeric values. So let's run that. Yep. So 2 was my first item, then I got 4 and 5. After your object magically arranges numeric values in numeric order, then it goes on to strings. Strings, on the other hand, and again, this is kind of confusing, they are in insertion order. So in this case, I have blah, which starts with a B. I have some key which starts with an S, and then another key which starts with an A. So if I look at my output, I have blah, some key, and another key. So it's not sorted alphabetically for strings, but for numbers it is. Again, kind of confusing. I'm not sure the rhyme or reason behind it. Just good to know about. But I'll reiterate my earlier point. Don't rely on the ordering for objects. There may be some sensible way they do it. Maybe it's guaranteed on some level, but I will never use it and assume that things are in order. Instead, I'll use arrays if I want something to be ordered. So that's a key point to know about objects in JavaScript. They are not ordered. They're very useful, but ordering is not one feature of objects. Everyone cool with that? Great, great, great. Another thing you can do with objects, again, not usual, but you can even add functions in objects. So let's say I want to create something called, I don't know. This is going to be a terrible example because I just kind of reiterated this point, but I'm going to actually use ordering just to go with something here. So let's say I want a function here that returns a second item. Again, ordering, don't rely on it, but I'm just going to do it for now, sorry. Values. So here's a keyword called this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this keyword, but this is a special keyword in JavaScript that refers to the item that it's enclosed in. So in this case, this value or this keyword refers to the object that it's contained in. So right now I'm using object.values, which extract the values out of my object. This is the actual object that I'm in. And in this case, I want to return the second item. So we're zero base, so 1 will be the second item. So in this case, if I wanted to use my function again, don't use ordering, rely on ordering, but just want to do this to show something. So I have a function, and I could just call that on my objects. And this should ideally return, if you remember what our ordering was, I guess I would print it out here. 4 is my second item in my array. But again, it's not ordered, so don't always rely on this. But I should probably have picked a better example for my function. I'm going to run that. OK, so I print out my object, and then I got 4 as an output. Because I'm outputting the value, not the key. So that is what I wanted. So again, functions, you can add them to it. Yeah, so that's something you might do. I don't think I've used this like functions with an object too much. If I get to that point, I'd probably switch over to something called classes, which will be a whole nother discussion. I'm not going to get too into that, but just good to know that's something you can do. Just in case you guys aren't, delete this, like that function. I've been using some object methods. When I was solving Roman numerals, I think I used one of them. Just so you guys are familiar with them, there are some object methods that kind of make it easier to get values out of there. So keys is one of them. Sorry, I shouldn't say values, but if I did this, this is going to return a collection of all the keys in my object. So in this case, I have 6 keys. I have blah, some key, another key, 5, 2, 4. So if I wanted to print that out and see what those values are, totally could. So here my console. All right, so I get an array of all my keys. So this could be very useful, especially if you need to like investigate items using keys. This is a great way to extract keys from your object. So again, this is the same ordering that we kind of saw before, but don't rely on that. Likewise, I used this earlier. Instead of, if I don't want my keys, if I want my values, I use something called object.values, and then I pass in my object into that. And that should get me the actual data part. So hello world 533, the false value there. And yep, that's what I see. That's what I expected. If you ever wanted to get both, like sometimes it's very useful to have both the key and the value. You can use something called entries. So that'll be my last example. Object.entries. Again, this is not stuff that I expect you guys to have memorized. That's what documentation's for. That's what Google's for. It's more about knowing that these exist and then knowing how to use them and when to use them for when you're coding up your solutions. Entries should be spelled correctly. All right, I'm just going to comment these two out to not conflict with them. Clear that, run this. All right, so it basically prints out essentially what my object looked like before, but these are in, this is an array and it has a series of arrays. So it's an array of arrays that prints out key value pairs. So again, this would be very useful if you need both the key and the value and you need to use all of them. That's object.entries will get that for you. All right, so again, there's many other object methods. These are definitely useful and most common when you're working with objects, so they get to know about. And yeah, so that will cover objects. It's another data structure in JavaScript. I would say arrays and objects are by far the two most common, most used ones, especially when I went through the curriculum, did challenges. Yeah, these are reoccurring, so definitely be familiar with them and how they work and what they're used for. There are other data structures that exist. I'm not going to go over all of them because one, I don't know all of them because I'm not that familiar with JavaScript, but one common one that you might see is called set. So let me just declare a set. To declare a set, you need to use the new keyword and then set in parentheses like that. This might look kind of weird or kind of unfamiliar to you guys, but this is syntax for creating a new object of set. So we have a set there. If I want to add items to my set, I could do my set.add. And let's add hello in there, my set. We can add a number. Again, you don't have to have the same types in them in there. You can use whatever you want for the most part. You can even have an object in there if you want. Yeah, let's spice it up a bit. Let's add an array into my set. I think this should work. Let's, I don't know, all right, so if I want to print that out, and I should probably talk about what sets do at some point. Definitely don't want to forget that because that's key to understanding what a set does, but let me print out my set. See what that looks like. All right, so I have my set again. Kind of looks like an object that has curly braces, but if you notice, it's not key value pairs. It's actually just individual items, kind of like a array, but it's contained in curly braces instead. And I have my values. I have a string, I have a number, I have a list or an array within my set. Totally valid. But let me get to what sets actually do. So sets are a special data structure which only contain unique items. So let's compare that with lists. So if I have a list, and let's say I have 4, 5, 6, 4, 88, 4, 2, 5, 88 again. I don't know, whatever. These are random values I'm coming up with. I don't know why I like 88 so much, but all right. So I have this list, and it's a bunch of values in it. Sorry about my spacing. All right, that should be readable. Lists can contain duplicate items. So in this case, you see I have 4, I have 3 instances of 4 in here. I have a couple 88s. So that's totally fine if I console.log my lists, print it out. All right, that's what I had before. That's totally what I expected. But if I want to have a set, so let me actually delete my original set. And I have my set here. Let's instead do something. I think this is valid. Pardon me if this goes haywire. So I'm actually going to pass in my list by set. And let's see if this breaks or if this does what I want. Want to see my sets also. All right, so this did do what I wanted to. So the constructor for set can take in a list or any collection, and we'll turn it into a set. So what is a set? As I said before, it's something that does not allow for duplicates. So, excuse me. If you look at my original list, I have 10 items in there. The set only contains 6 items. If you notice, there's no duplicates in there. Even though I had 4 several times in my original array, and I had 88 a couple times, there's only one instance of that. So that can be, again, sets are useful for where you want only unique items. And don't worry, you want to do that manually. Like, again, I could do that with my list. Like I could theoretically have my list and then go through it in a for loop and like trying to monitor if I have a duplicate, then don't add a duplicate to a new array. It's not too difficult to do, but sets kind of do that automatically. So that's kind of the use case for sets. A couple other things I want to talk about with sets. You can kind of combine sets and they'll still work the way you want it to. So let's say I had my sets equals, I think this is the notation for it. Actually, I'm not sure enough, so I'm just going to make a list. Let's say 5, 6, and 7. And then let's say you have your sets. Your set has values. Let's say you have 6, 8, and 10. All right, so there we have 2 sets. Let's say I wanted to combine these sets. I'm going to introduce actually something I'm not sure if this was covered before, but let's get to know about. So let's say my combined sets equals, I'm going to create a new set out of this, and I'm going to actually combine what I had before. So this isn't specific to sets, but I just want to highlight a special operator here, your sets. All right, so I have something that may look unfamiliar to you guys. I have these 3 dots. What's going on here? So this is called a spread operator. And what this actually does is takes each individual value in your container, and I probably shouldn't use the word in its definition, but kind of spreads them out or makes them individual values. So they're no longer contained in the container. So in this case, I'm spreading out all the values in my first set, and then also doing with your set. So these are just going to be individual values, and that's going to create a new list for me, or a new array. Like getting my terminology mixed up. So that's just one way to kind of break apart a container. So if you guys want to see this more clearly, if I do console.log and I do the spread operator on just my set, and again, you could use the spread operator with lists. Also, I believe they work with objects. Don't quote me on that, but they should work with most containers. All right, so let me just run this quickly and combine set 10. Save that, clear my console, and all right, let's see. Add one more line here, console.log. All right, so 2 things I'm highlighting here. Hopefully I'm not making it too confusing. The first 2 lines, I'm printing out my original set, and then I'm using my spread operator to print out individual values. So if you kind of look at this, I have a set container, and then the second console output are just individual values. These aren't contained in any sort of container. They're just individual values. I could pick them off as I wish. But yeah, so that's kind of what the spread operator does. So if you see dot, 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 that's what it's doing there. So in this case, I'm breaking apart both my sets, combining them into a list, and then have a combined set which contains only unique values. So the 6 was not duplicated there. Hopefully that made sense. Again, I don't think I use set for any of the challenges in the curriculum, but they're just good to know about. And again, there are other data structures out there beyond set and objects and arrays, but again, that's kind of on a need to know basis. If you get into a situation where you have a very special case, you might want to dig into other data structures within JavaScript. All right, so that kind of covers the JavaScript portion that I wanted to go over. Hopefully all that made sense. Again, discussion time will be great for if you don't understand kind of how objects and keys work, or if you want a better understanding of sets, definitely ask questions, get to understand the data structures within JavaScript. All right, I'm gonna call for a quick break because I think our next section is gonna be kind of long. Hopefully we could get out by 11:30. But yeah, let's take a quick 4-minute break. Again, stretch your legs or grab a cup of coffee, whatever you need to do. And then we're gonna dive into Python, which again, I really enjoy Python. So hopefully you guys will too, once you get familiar with it. All right, so I'm gonna stop recording. Let's take a break and reconvene in 3 minutes.